Oh, wait, never mind. He just barged into the room.
Oh, my goodness. Rogier, couldn't keep you out.
Hi, Roger.
Hello. Yeah, when do you arrive here in Stockholm?
I'm going to be there on Tuesday. We're flying out Tuesday night. Is that right? And then and then the Wednesday the GCA is, and then we're flying back on Thursday morning.
But I'm not coming. I didn't get to go, Mike.
It's just me and Emma.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the politics of that, but
they don't let me out of the building.
I just would have thought Greg would have had enough merit marks to.
No, are you kidding me? I'm going down in merit marks as the days go on, Mike.
Especially once this podcast.
Yeah. Roger released early recordings of the prior one, and really, as he says, a career limited move. A CLM had written all over it.
There's that lovely jingle. Have you heard that jingle before?
I have. It was very nice, very professional.
Is it the same one again or not?
It's the same jingle, and I've
nice.
never been so excited about it. I thought it was sort of like a 1960s program leader kind of thing, and then I realized I am up in the age there, and maybe that's what I deserve. I was going for more like a funky Beyonce. I don't even want to talk about it, but someone said to me the other day. They said, "Yeah, enjoying your podcast. I really like the jingle." Welcome to Big Closet, Small Planet, made possible with generous support from the CNA Foundation, the H&M Foundation, the Relander Foundation, and Tencel. I'm Mike Schrager. If you're anything like me and you pay attention to that intersection between apparel and sustainability, you are likely mesmerized by all those periodic announcements about really cool breakthrough ideas, these technologies aimed at transforming our industry. Some days you're reading about a new material like algae, or better yet, a new way to trace the origin of our clothes by using what everyone's talking about, blockchain technology, or, wait for it now, artificial intelligence. And if I was not really born a skeptic, which I think I am, I could easily be convinced that these robots that are coming are going to replace our garment workers in production factories within the next 5 years, or that you and I will be printing tailor-made clothes from digital 3D printers built into our closets within 10 years' time. Talking about these very cool new, dare I use the word disruptive, ideas and solutions, they're exciting and energizing, and I should know because I love it. But the fact is, the road from these ideas, these very energizing ideas, to scalable, transformative innovation is usually, I'm told, and from my own experience, long and full of tripwires. And placed in the context of our current environmental and social challenges, it is simply not clear how many of these exciting ideas really are worth investing in, both commercially and for the benefit of society. So, if they're scaled, will they actually reduce our environmental impacts in a substantial way? Can they scale in the time frames we need them to? Can they make the lives of workers significantly better? Or are they potential distractions? I have no idea. And that is why I've invited a pair of smart and savvy experts to weigh in, giving us their view of the innovation landscape. Hopefully they'll tell us what's hot, what's not, how to think about this in more nuanced ways. I guess I'll introduce the Sonny and Cher, the Wayne and Garth, the Beyonce and Jay-Z of sustainable innovation. Welcome. Now it's your turn finally, guys. Greg and Rogier, you were waiting. You're like, when is he finishing?
Well, after being named Cher, it sounds like it's my turn to speak now, Mike.
That is, you took the cue. Just so our listeners understand that you're not some random people from off the street. Greg, who was just now talking, who talked about being Cher. Greg, you're working for an organization called Plug and Play, correct?
This is correct. Yep.
And I understand Plug and Play is like it's a business incubator where you identify promising startup ideas that can be scaled at some point. They need help to grow. They need investment, and you make that happen.
That sounds like a great definition.
Okay. And you also have an interesting, lovely pedigree because you've worked at the U.S. Department of Energy and you have a degree in business and environmental science from Stanford. And to top it off, you started an earthquake warning company. So you have some startup experience.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. And I like to think all that qualifies me for is paying off a very large student debt. But yes,
Right.
indeed, that's my background.
Very good. And Rogier is returning to us. He is a VIP on our pod. You've graced our presence here before, and you're working at Fashion for Good. Just quickly, your role at Fashion for Good for everyone?
Yeah, investment manager there. So I'm really doing the things on the investment side, direct investments into our ventures, and also helping setting up the Good Fashion Fund that's going live imminently.
And you weren't in sustainability before. You worked in more mainstream commercial.
Oh, he was a bloodthirsty banker.
I knew it. Although he told me, and I don't know if this is fair to say, he also, because of his big heart, started a dog food company.
Yes, Toby.nl.
Maybe one of your future sponsors, Mike.
I'm telling you, you both are very, very broad and deep in terms of your skills and experiences. But thank you for helping me, because and you work together, right? Because Fashion for Good and Plug and Play have a collaboration based there in Amsterdam, and so you work in close collaboration.
That's right.
Okay, and let's get into this, because now we understand what you do. I need help understanding all that's going on in this innovation space. So, and our listeners probably want to understand that because they're receiving emails like I am with new technologies and la 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 la. So, how do you make sense of this? So first, from the idea of talking about innovation, because it's a quite, in some cases, I would argue, overused word. But the idea is that we need to innovate to transform the industry, do things differently than we do today. So how do you think about that in the work that you do, and what's your theory of change?
I think innovation is important in this space for a number of reasons, but I guess overarching, Mike, it comes down to really, if you think where the brands have concentrated their efforts, their business for the last 50 years, it's really in owning the consumer relationship. So they don't own suppliers, they don't own manufacturers, they don't own farms. Anything upstream is now outsourced and really just purchased. And so innovations in new fibers, in dyeing technologies, these need to be brought to the brands because, they're really focused on product, marketing, their own brand images. And so, for just kind of how the industry has shaped today, there's a real role of bringing novelty into these brands just because of essentially where their businesses are focused. And, I'll take it one step further and say, within these suppliers, within the existing supply chains, the dye stars, the huntsmans, they're well known. So so-called incremental innovations or even big innovations from these existing players are likely to be well identified and thus have a chance of commercial success. But somebody coming from a garage, somebody coming from an adjacent industry, they really need a voice. They really need a place at the table. And that's essentially what Fashion for Good does, literally sits them down at the table next to a potential brand partner, and off you go to try to make a business development arrangement.
And I would just add to that, the coming from an impact perspective, how important it is that we focus on innovation. This industry is already super big, especially in terms of environmental and social footprint that it currently has. And it's growing rapidly in terms of volume, especially over the next 10, 20 years. So, business as usual or incremental initiatives are probably not going to help us to stop that or change that significantly. So we need to focus on innovation in this industry that had basically, stood still for the last 100, 200, maybe even longer.
So is the idea, Rogier, that the established players, because they're within an established way of working, may not be interested in these disruptive ideas or won't invest in them because they're just too high risk?
No, I think the industry is very fragmented, and innovation in this industry has always been focused on the processes have fundamentally been very much the same. Look at the dyeing process or a tanning process or those kind of or raw materials even. You don't see a lot of transformational innovation there, and that's because the incumbents are focused on efficiency focused improvements, and that's really trying to fine-tune an existing technology rather than starting from the fundamentals and looking at how can we get to the same output using a completely different, exotic way of working. And that is really coming not from the incumbent so much, but oftentimes from other pockets of research or fundamental studies.
Oh, that makes sense. So, and again, the theory is that given the extent of the sustainability challenges, we can't just do efficiency gains in many areas like water improvements or energy improvements if we're going to address the
sounds
scope
correct.
of the challenge.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But here and then I think lies the challenge, or the reverse side of that equation is these big game changers, quote unquote, throw whatever buzzwords you want out there to classify them. They are extremely risky, so you're going to have lots of failures, and they just need enormous amounts of capital to mature. And so this kind of right around the corner, you'll see all these new cool technologies that are great for the planet and great for consumer wardrobes. That's a bit of a falsity, because the more disruptive a technology is, the more time and the more failure rates are going to be required to see one big winner. But I agree that one big winner could really change the landscape from recycling to dyeing to fiber production. So it's this kind of long tail odds where this is kind of the venture world that we live in, but it's also the internet, and there's been other few examples where you kind of bet on the one rare racehorse that wins the Kentucky Derby, Preakness, and all the other races. But finding that one winner is a real tricky game, Mike.
Well, so that's fascinating and makes a lot of sense. There's an operating theory here, though that we can hold lightly as we go through and talk more, which is they may be more high risk. These disruptive innovations, they may be fewer far between in terms of being successful. But Roger is implying that if we don't do them, we're not going to be able to make our industry really meet key sustainability goals. And I don't know if that's true or not, research wise, but it sounds to me like there's a working assumption by some of the players in this space that that's the case, and therefore we need to invest in these high risk ideas. So I'll leave that there. You don't have to answer that because I know I'm right, and you're just going to. But let's move on. So we again try to make sense of this world, this innovation world. So if I was to draw a map or try to categorize things the best you can, I know categories are often limiting. Is there a way that you all in your work make sense of the things that come at me in an ad hoc way? How would you categorize the kinds of innovations that are happening?
Yeah, I guess it starts with the supply chain itself, right? It goes from raw materials to sort of very broadly. It goes from raw materials to dyeing, finishing, then the cut, make, trim, which is the currently still labor-intensive middle part of the process where you actually make the garment, and then into the sort of retail use phase, and eventually recycling or disposal. And there's on top of that, there's a couple of elements that go over the whole supply chain, like transparency and traceability, those kind of things that don't fall into one of those supply chain steps. But I guess it starts there, the sort of overview of innovations. So you start with that supply chain steps breakdown, and then for each of those steps, you would categorize or try to pool the innovations that come to us, try to pool those into categories. And that's really what we've done over the last 2 years, having now approximately 1,500 innovators in our database, we've now really been able to pool those and cluster those innovations into different categories. So that's really what we've done, and that's the framework we use for innovation in the textile and fashion space.
And Mike, let me make that
sure.
tangible for you and your listeners, which is to say, give an example. So materials. A simple example could be trying to commercialize more readily available kapok fibers or algae fibers. So that's kind of a raw material example. In processing, maybe it's a new way of denim dyeing. We have a beautiful company in our program now called Indigo Mills Design that has a fundamentally new way of dyeing indigo. And then manufacturing. Essentially, automation is the big buzzword here. Basically, sewing robots, things that make essentially labor more efficient. And then in retail, circular business models, rental platforms, leasing. Anything that kind of touches a consumer at the point of sale falls in rental. And then, of course, as Roger mentioned, traceability. The big technology there being blockchain, kind of ways to bring discrete sets of information all together in a verified way, as well as overarching kind of enablers, so regulation, finance, maybe green bonds, et cetera. So that's kind of what we mean by this bucket that transcends all those prior categories.
Okay, that was very helpful for me. So I know it's not easy to identify one or the other, black or white, in terms of what could have the highest potential. How do you look at these? If these are the types of solutions, how do you think about their potential? Like, today, when you look at things, is there a lot of potential in raw materials? Is there a lot of potential in the processing area? How do you make sense of that? What criteria do you use to look at potential?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer your question, Mike, but first I'm going to complain about it, which is to say,
Roger,
ranking.
this is why you complain about Greg. He complains a lot.
Yeah, we just have complaints on complaints. Picking a winner in one of these categories is not going to be helpful. Understanding their relative merits in terms of impact, in terms of investment potential on returns, sure, I think we can get into that conversation, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say, we can't think about these buckets in isolation, and I'll make that tangible for you. So let's take, for example, what happens at the end of a life with 80% of the garments today, right? You basically throw them away, they go rot in the landfill, or you burn them. Those are basically what happens to the vast majority of all the clothes we consume and enjoy today. And so if you think about, well, maybe one day we could recycle these. Okay, well, that then implies a certain level of design needs to go into thinking about the construction of that garment. A certain choice of materials needs to go into the fundamental makeup of it. And then ideally, you would have chemicals and other treatment processes that are conducive to a recycling at the end of life. So you really can't pick a bucket and then say, I just love this bucket, because it really is a culmination of all the prior steps in the supply chain that get you to where you want to live in recycling or where you want to live in cut, make, trim. So, we can go down the favorites roads. I certainly have mine, but I just want your listeners to understand that, at some level, we need to be thinking in systems, all of the above type of solutions. That kind of mindset is going to be, I think, really important as we go through these different pros and cons.
Right. Well, I guess why I asked, and that seems very wise. Yes, Greg, you are wise. It feels wise because they're all related. At the same time, you could identify a raw material and say, well, this could take 10 years to get off the ground. So it's a long-term investment in terms of R&D and testing and scaling. Whereas some other things, perhaps in the software field, robotics, I don't know, maybe things that can happen more quickly and therefore people are more excited about. Do you see that kind of differentiation?
I think that's right. And certainly, in the retail space, this type of, these types of rental apps, these types of leasing programs, that stuff's software. You could copy and paste it. So it's highly scalable as well as readily available. So you're going to see a lot of activity in the market around new business models, circular business models, take back programs in, I'm going to say 12 months and less, versus chemical recycling. I think in the chemical recycling space, this one excites me the most. I think it has a tremendous impact potential. It's essentially the capitalist, proverbial wet dream, right? You get to consume and consume and consume, and nobody tells you can't consume, because whatever you throw away just goes right back into a new product. It's kind of the ultimate, consumption dream. But that's 5-10 years away, and even then, I don't think a lot of our practices and behaviors around some of the disposable clothes we love is going to be commensurate with that model. But I think that's probably the area that I get most excited about. But it's also the area that's probably the most immature, probably going to have the highest failure rates. Probably needs hundreds, if not billions of dollars of capital behind it. And yeah, that's just kind of the factual truth behind my favorite area in kind of the end of life recycling technologies.
Well, and I guess it also depends on what you think is impactful. What KPIs you to focus on, because you say automation in one sentence with recycling, and recycling is very effective at taking away some of the plastics that are currently being disposed of. But is it really solving, for example, carbon emissions or water usage? Because those recycled plastics often go back to a very early stage of the supply chain. So go back to a pre-PET stage, like TPA, one of the precursors of PET. So that still needs to go through the whole supply chain, including all of the water usage, all of the energy usage that's being used. And does that really then transform the supply chain enough to solve some of the carbon emissions problems that we have? So and the same goes probably for automation. It might solve, if you really look at it in the long term, it might solve some of the labor issues that we're currently having. But does it solve the other issues? Probably not. So it really depends on what KPIs to focus on as well.
So let's come back to that when we look at some of the other challenges in this field, because I think that's a crucial point. You took the words right out of my mouth, Rogier. But I was thinking, Greg talked about an area that he's fascinated with. I think you were talking about the end of life aspect. Are there Rogier, any innovations or companies that really excite you now? Not that you're particularly loyal to them, but you think this is something that really interests me, given my experience with companies.
I really like the chemical recycling space as well. It's really a space that many people are watching and is currently developing towards really MVP ready innovators that are currently, right in that phase of trying to do a first pilot, a first implementation that is getting to, numbers or volumes that are crucial enough to really be a stepping stone towards really transforming the industry. So I think it's probably in this day and age is probably one of the ones that is most interesting. So I would agree with that. I'm very hopeful that something comes out of the 10, 15 innovators that are currently the furthest in maturity there.
So just to say, sorry to interrupt, but I was thinking, I thought you'd say something like blockchain. Like everyone's talking about blockchain. Why is blockchain as exciting as, is it going to be some breakthrough for transparency and traceability, or is it still too early to tell?
So let's cut through some of the
yes, please.
Ad here.
Help me.
I actually think that there are a few industries in which the fundamentals of blockchain make a lot of sense, and let's characterize those as very disjointed supply chains where there's not a lot of inherent trust between buyers and sellers, let alone do you even know who these people are. And so, the tenets of blockchain of having kind of one set of records that everybody can look at, but nobody can unilaterally change, that's relatively efficient in terms of storing this type of data. We're not talking trillions of bytes of information. It's transaction type of information. So I think the fashion industry and the textile supply chain fits that very well. And so I think you're going to see a lot of successes and really, it kind of falls into two buckets in my mind, and I'm pretty skeptical about the blockchain unless it falls into one, which is kind of a risk mitigation, saying I need in this day and age to really know everybody who touches my final product and verify that they meet some certain standards. And so I think this kind of license to operate is certainly a viable tool. And then I think the other is in storytelling, which is to say consumers are increasingly and should increasingly demand knowing where their article came from, who made it, and what's it made of. And really today, brands are struggling at, where is this organic cotton? Is this, your chrome-free leather, et cetera, and without a really robust set of data inventorying all along the life of a garment, all the way from farm to retailer, I don't see how you're going to be able to tell those kind of stories that consumers are increasingly demanding.
Well, I'm going to keep my eye out for the next blockchain.
Yeah, buy Bitcoin now, Mike. Bitcoin. Buy it. It's low. It's low. Buy it. Buy. I'm
feeling for it. I feel like I have a real finger for this. A finger, as they say in Swedish, a fingertip feeling. Let's move on, because I'm thinking, we've had conversations before about the challenges, and you've inherent in what you're talking about is the more traditional challenges of any startup, new idea trying to break into the market, get enough market share to be something that becomes the norm, as opposed to sort of a niche kind of product or service. And so you have all that baked in this challenge of sustainability and innovation, right? You have, how do you just get those up to scale? How do you get them to succeed? And I'm assuming that there are some basic formulas that say you need to invest in 10 companies in order to get one to succeed, or 20 to get one to succeed. I don't know. You would be able to tell me that better because of your education and experience. So you have that, perhaps, and then you have this sustainability angle, which Rogier sort of alluded to, which is, does it actually make a difference? Like, if it's scaled, is it going to really drive change towards these sustainability goals? So if you could, and this could go on for a long discussion, so I don't want to overcomplicate it, but if there are some things around that you could reflect on, and also anything you see in terms of obstacles to scaling innovation.
Yeah, I mean, to start with your last question, are these innovations actually going to change, the world for good? I think the and especially innovations that we see here and that we select here through our programs, there's definitely some very, very promising innovators in there. And if they could actually scale up their technology that often has already been proven in labs, and if they can make that, in a way that is viable in a capitalistic society, so financially competitive or at cost parity, then I think those kind of things can really scale up theoretically. So I guess it really comes down to, as Greg said in the intro, if we have a few of those innovators that we can really scale, that would actually take off probably a couple of percentage points from the carbon emissions that we currently seeing in this industry. So I'm hopeful that it would change. It's more about how do we get there and do that within a time period that isn't 50 years. So how do we do that within the next 2 decades is really the issue. And then there's a couple of problems there that are hindering innovators from scaling up.
Yeah, and since Roger took the kumbaya position, it's only logical that then I come in with the harsh realities of the world here. And so, these challenges, I think Mike, you brought up one, so let's address it straight off, which is tolerance for failure. And I really doubt that a lot of the capital we're seeing in these kind of smaller family impact driven type of places have the fund size to be tolerant. The brands who get behind some of these companies, are they going to be willing to see 30%, 40, 50, 60, 70% of their kind of bets fail. The kind of classic distribution that just is inherent with this type of high risk, high reward. I'm skeptical on that. So that's a big challenge, just kind of an attitude, kind of perspective, and just a thought of just mindset of the actors in this space. Are the partners and the brands tend to be more risk adverse, which is a problem in and of itself. And so, that's a big challenge. And then, when we get down to just how much capital is needed, it really cannot be emphasized enough that I think this is one of the major bottlenecks. And you would hope that our program would be able to kind of excite these pools of capital, bring in other players. We regularly reach out. If there's a listener out there who has somebody who has some money that they want to put towards this cause, please send us an email and we'll get you hooked up. Just because the check writers in our space are far and few between, and the magnitude of what they can write in terms of checks are orders behind where we need it to be. And almost to the point where, let's take an analogy from the clean energy space where, 5-10 years ago, you were looking at these first commercial implementations of solar manufacturing or electric car battery facilities, you name it. And, the market said this stuff's just too risky. Nobody wants to be the first fool who builds the first plant of an unproven technology. And so in the States, Uncle Sam said, okay, well, we'll guarantee loans. We'll kind of come in and augment the market and the risk structure and literally help buttress these financing to the point where you take what is ultra risky down to something that venture capitalists, project financiers say, okay, this kind of pencils out. I can, if Uncle Sam's going to stand behind me, I can do this. And so I think that type of program, these very creative and large scale financing structures are going to be needed because in the field of chemical recycling, these technologies will graduate to the point where they need to build an enormously large-scale system. And there's not a funder today who would look at that technology and say, yep, that's right for my balance sheet. And then you go to venture, and venture says, well, if you're raising 100 million, everybody who invested to this point in time is basically just diluted to zero. So that's a very attractive proposition, let me tell you, for those venture capitalists. So who's going to fund that? It's a real big challenge, Mike. I don't want to sound too negative, but it's something that needs to be addressed.
Well,
Very negative.
He's negative, and I thought that you were going to be the negative one today,
Yes.
because of your cold and everything. But this sort of just confirms something that Rogier and I have been chatting about. But it makes it a little clearer for me that if you both, from working in the trenches, see that the money is not there on the macro level, which is you're going to need to invest in X amount of companies in order to get one or two of them to succeed down the road, and to scale, you need to have that scaling money, that it doesn't seem like we have the financial instruments or the even awareness that they are needed by some of the key players. So it seems to me there needs to be some brainstorming on how do you create funds that allow you to invest in lots of high risk ventures, while at the same time getting some sort of benefit from also at the same time investing in less low risk things, a fund that incorporates both of them at such a large scale. Is that something we need? Is that something we should be pursuing in our discussions? Is that something we should be asking the richest companies to fund? Fund?
Yeah, I guess the money has to come from somewhere, and especially in the examples that Greg is giving, where actually hundreds of millions are needed to scale up a single technology, and then you're just talking about one, and we probably need 20 of those to get to the one that really is the viable one. So that is that's an element there is a space within our textile innovation space that needs creative thinking around financing and how do we get there, and the money has to come from somewhere. So it has to be, either the government or philanthropies or venture capital needs to adjust or needs to be supplemented with risk tolerant capital that doesn't have the same return profile, so they can actually invest in these kind of things. So there's a problem in some areas, but I would say, I'm very positive today, as you mentioned, and I would say the positive side of this is that there's also areas within this textile innovation space that are actually being overlooked by traditional investors, but are really attractive, fundamentally. There's some spaces in dyeing or finishing technologies, which I particularly like because they're oftentimes easy to implement, easy to be adopted by the supply chain, could actually be proven to be financially attractive very early in their development stage. So, investing in those could actually, and has been already, there's some cases that have scaled up and that have proven to deliver good return on investments, very attractive to investors. So, I think maybe getting some of those cases on the map, and that investors are seeing those as examples of, hey, there's money to be made in this space, could be really powerful, and also trying to further and advance those more difficult cases like Greg was mentioning.
And Mike, for once in my life, I'm gonna agree with Roger, and
Wow.
that is to say, I think it's really hard for just the average listener or even us in the industry to truly grasp how big textiles, fashion, footwear is. I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars. Everybody in the world, expresses themselves or wishes to express themselves through what they wear. So it's really a force of nature in terms of an industry on this planet. And it has not only been kind of operating in this archaic sense for basically ever. So it's ripe for a refresh. It's ripe for new business models, etc. But it also does have these promising little pockets, as Roger said, that you don't need 100 million. Hopefully you don't have 10-to-1 failure rates. Hopefully you don't need multi-party, multi-stakeholder agreements. I mentioned one of my favorites in the processing, this Indigo Mills design company. Screw all of the sustainability metrics of their technology. It just makes dyed yarns faster and at a higher quality. So any manufacturer in the world would choose it because on a per yard basis, it is the best product out there.
So in some sense, what you're saying is this industry needs to be disrupted anyway because of the way it's been operating. And so if you can find those disruptions independent of sustainability, you have a unique opportunity to break the bank, maybe. Whereas, and then you add the sustainability part, which seems to, in some cases, just be a part of the new solution because you have to deliver services in a more efficient way, and so maybe you get that automatically. But they don't necessarily; those two things don't necessarily go together. So let's move on because I wanted to hear if you, and now just not a long soliloquy, but just a comment. So, given all this stuff, because we're just trying to get a landscape for all of our listeners, if there's one thing you would focus on to accelerate change so that sustainable innovations could be faster adopted, what would you choose? And there's some implication that you would look at finance, but maybe that's not what it would be.
No, I would seek to encourage brands across the world to be more risk tolerant in terms of technologies within their supply chain, in terms of piloting business models, just really risk taking in terms of what the future of fashion and textiles could look like in an attempt to kind of work through the pains of trial and error, but B, to be the winner, to be the one who kind of is the next Rent the Runway, so that that these brands don't basically dinosaur themselves out of business. And so I think there's a lot to be gained, and no better player today to do it in a relatively quick and resource efficient way. And so I would just love a real hungry appetite for innovation and failure and tolerance for that within the brands.
And to maybe well, my view is very much an extension of that, which would be how do you get those brands to do that? These brands have been operating in the same way for a very long time. Are always really looking at incremental changes in terms of their supply chain and focus. Their R&D department is often it is not much more than developing the next season of fashion. That is R&D in this industry, especially downstream. So how do you get them to change? I guess starts with the awareness, also with their owners. So many of the brands, especially in Europe and the US, are on the stock markets, are owned by asset managers, pension funds, etc. So how do we get them to look at this industry and think about the consequences that they are having indirectly through the assets? So are there better alternatives to that? And do they have a role in the boards or the shareholder meetings by saying, look at the sustainability of this industry, and what role do these downstream players play in the longer term? So in the next 5 years, what is your plans and what is your kind of innovation that really gets you to a different level, sustainability wise? So I think those people also have a role to play here.
Very interesting. Very interesting angles, guys. So before we wrap up, some of our listeners like to know what people like you think about when you're not thinking about your next cup of coffee as you meet a new entrepreneur, or maybe that is what you're thinking about. What do you what's making you guys happy just now? What can you recommend for a listener to read or to listen to, or is there any person you admire these days? Just give us some little sort of brain candy.
Yeah, so I guess you're asking kind of where we get our energy, given the trials and tribulations of our little niche. Yeah, it may be a cop out, but I think for me personally, it's 100% true, which is to say, these entrepreneurs. We just invited our fifth program here to Fashion for Good and Plug and Play, and they bring so much energy and kind of commitment and arguably kind of self-delusion that they're going to be the one that kind of at all odds makes it through, that to sit behind them, to try to enable them, to try to get them some capital, to try to hook them up with a brand, that's almost a real privilege. And so there's so much energy and just power within that entrepreneurial pool that we fortunately get to see on a regular basis, that it really does refresh the soul for me. I think it's a real privilege.
There's of course,
Rogier, what are you going to say now? You don't have a choice but to applaud whoever you're working with right now.
Of course, this is true, but Greg and me, and maybe you've heard that in this conversation as well, have a sort of realistic view, or we see the upsides and the downsides and the struggles that this roadmap to a better world still has, but. I think, therefore, it really eats away your energy, during the year, because you're seeing so many roadblocks still to scaling of our innovators that we support so much and that we believe so much in. So it's good to have these kind of replenishments of your energy during those days, and really seeing those new faces full of hope. On the other hand, there's also people within these kind of ecosystems that we've built here in Amsterdam, for example, that are just chronically positive. And I think that's the attitude you need in sustainability, because there's going to be so many roadblocks, and especially if you work in this industry for decades, you just need that attitude to get through it. Otherwise, you'll give up within a set amount of years.
Fair enough. So what gets you energized? Is it these positive people you're working with?
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of people in our offices that have that chronic positiveness, and I really enjoy those kind of conversations and their sort of point of views, as opposed to Greg's negativity.
I can see you guys hate being around each other. It's a terrible chemistry you have there.
Yeah, it's contagious, Mike. Watch out.
I'm feeling it already. That's why I want to round this podcast off. You both are brilliant, and I really appreciate it. I think that for me, at least, I hope you out there who are listening have a better sense. I have a sense we'll bring Greg and Rogier back periodically to to check in and figure out, how we assess the next movements in this area. So hopefully you both are happy to join us again sometime in the future. Let's be sure that you out there give us your feedback. We want to hear what you think. So don't hesitate to reach out to us, comment, give your ideas for this. Do you agree, disagree, future podcast topics? You can reach us at bigclosets@sustainablefashionacademy.org. And boys, we'll see each other very soon.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.